shot, two shots, I'm drunk, who's not? I just wanna make you feel alive.
What is up, everybody? How are you all doing this morning? Thank you for tuning in. Today's stream, we're going to be working again on the Crossgarud 2.0, same as last week, but this time, instead of a removable battery chassis, what you're looking at right now, I will be designing a chassis that features a crystal chamber, which is the intended usage of the magnetic doors on this lightsaber. This should go a little bit smoother than last week, I'm hoping, because I already know the basic geometry of the hilt, which means that I won't have to spend a whole bunch of time measuring and calculating. I can just use this basic shape that I already have here, and instead of putting a battery in this cutout area, I'll just be putting a crystal chamber. Now, the one thing that is going to be a little bit tricky with a crystal reveal version of this chassis is that, as you can see, there's not really any additional battery slots on this thing. So, what my thought is, I will either remove the recharge port that's here and put a small 1.3mm or 3.1mm recharge port in the actual reveal area, or I can set this up to where it will be wired in after the fact and can be stuck in from the top where the recharge plug is, the kill key, in order to take up less space. I'm not sure which of those options I'll go with at this point. I think the smaller moved recharge port might be the better option, so that's what we're going to go with. Once again, thank you to everybody who's tuned in, and I hope to see a few more before the stream's over. Last week's stream was really great. We had a bunch of involvement. I'll be doing a Prism version. This one is an NEC board. This time around I'll be making Prism, and of course either of these versions of chassis, as well as I may, hey Ben, how's it going? I may have another version that is a 2 battery setup for either parallel or series batteries when you need to run either a high amperage application or high voltage, such as the Crystal Focus or Petit Crouton. But that's enough about last week's. Let's go ahead and get right down to it. So what I'm going to do to start with is I'm just going to open up this chassis file here and strip it down back to the basic shape. And then I will use that to create the new geometry, so I'm not wasting a bunch of time recreating. I will leave the speaker holder modeled, and the board holder I'll only need to do a little bit of modification to, because the Prism and the NEC board in this configuration are fairly close in size. So I'm just selecting features here that I know that I'm not going to use, and then I'll remove them all. Gonna do it in a couple chunks here to avoid overloading my computer. Alright, you know what? I think I went one further than I would have liked. Let's that roll up a little bit. Give it a second. Alright, so what I'm going to do instead is I'm just going to use the rollback feature and find out. Okay, I did want to keep this cut here. I'll just be modifying it, which is, that is a combination of 16 and 19. So if I go back to 20, should still have some happiness going on. I do want to keep this guy though. That is 20. Okay. And you know what? This little detail here can stay the way that looks. This as well. That's not hurting anything as it is. I may do a little bit of modification up here, but honestly that probably can stay. So I'm gonna be a little more selective about this. The more time I can save, the better. What is 26? What's cut 26? What's number 6? Okay. I think I can get rid of all of those. You know what? I'm gonna do it one at a time. Alright, so I know that one is our unnecessary cut in the bottom. So I can delete everything between this formation here, which is going to be cut 23, and this sketch here. Because that's all the recharge port geometry. This is to allow the screws that mount the wire holders to pass along the chassis. Alright, so that I'm keeping. These two I also need to keep. That guy I'll keep. Also that. Okay, I already said I wanted to keep 19. 18 I'll keep, but modify. That one I may or may not keep. We will see. That's a definite keeper. I know I can get rid of that. Unfortunately, that affects a whole bunch of other stuff. So let's undo it and see if we can't work around that in any way. Alright, one thing I should have done, I need to make a copy of this. Alright, that is now copied. I'm going to close that and say don't save any of the changes. Which should mean we keep it exactly as it was. Yes, we do. Perfect. Then we're going to go ahead and open up that copied version. Which ought to have those changes that I had been making. Yep, let's see, there's the recharge port isn't there. Some of the deletions are not present anymore, which is what I was hoping for. That affects this guy, which is easy enough to recreate. So I can get rid of that. That I can get rid of. What's it affect? Cut 11 and cut 10. Let's see what those are. Cut 10, I'll be getting rid of anyway. Same with cut 11. So I'll just go ahead and delete those all. Now this is the one that pretty much wrecks everything, if I remember correctly. So let's save that for a minute. Those I can get rid of. Ah, that one has a lot of dependent items. Okay. Let's see exactly what this is going to change on us. So if I go to delete, it's going to give me a list. I have fillet 1, bosses 3, 7, 6. Okay, so let's check 3, 7, and 6. What are those guys? There's 3. Which, that of course has a bunch of dependencies. Yeah. So I may just have to rework this section anyways. Luckily it's not too difficult. What I'm hoping is I can avoid losing that though, which is, let's cut 14 and 15 and fillet 2. So I'm gonna see if I can, if those show up in here. It does not look like 14, 15, and fillet 2 show up in this list, so I'm gonna go ahead and delete that. And yes, we still have our speaker holder, which is nice. I do have to rebuild some of this other stuff though, unfortunately. I kept this sketch, which is nice. The other sketches, these guys right here, aren't really doing me any good. So these, I'm gonna go ahead and get rid of. Like so. I'm going to modify this guy to represent the half. As on the actual hilt, it is, of course, cut halfway through. I'll also put a, or you know what? I'm actually going to go slightly past the half. Yes, I think I am. That way, you'll only be able to see the metal crystal inserts, and not any of the chassis, the plastic chassis, peeking out. So I'm going to go ahead and bump that to 5/8 of an inch. That leaves approximately 3/8 down below here. Like that. And I'll just have to make some pieces that fit directly into that, and we'll be good to go. I will cut some of this out. I think I'll leave a little wall there, but I do want to cut some of that out so that you can see all the way through the chamber into the back. The other option is, of course, to split the chassis into 2 pieces and then have full round inserts that connect the 2 pieces. We'll see what the how the geometry of the chamber itself starts to work out, and then we'll make a decision concerning that. So I can go ahead and use this guy to create a new cut. We're gonna come to, we're gonna say an 1/8 inch off of this. That gives us room to cut anything in for the crystal chamber if we need to have any additional securing methods. But that still ought to be plenty of space for the battery. Let's go ahead and verify that. 2.9 inches, yes, that is enough space. most batteries are not longer than about 2 3/4 of an inch. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start with the blade holder. I'm going to rebuild that area. Then I'll model in the battery holder. And lastly, the crystal chamber. And I am going to go with the recharge port in the crystal chamber option. Now, here's a thought that I've just had. If I look at this one, I can see that this battery, yes, it would fit up here, but it would also fit down here. It would stick into the crystal area a little bit. But if I used a shortened recharge port, would I be able to fit a board in there? A nano, yes. Prism, it's a little doubtful. Let's go ahead and throw a prism in here and just make that evaluation. So I'm opening my prism file that I have on hand. None of my overlays or interfaces or menus or any of that sort of thing show up on the stream, but I am using SolidWorks to browse to a new file location right now. I have a large folder of items that are shared between many assemblies. And within that folder is a folder of soundboards where I keep my prism. So I'm just going to go ahead and pop this guy in here, flip him over onto his side, and yeah, it might fit. It might fit. It would be cutting it awfully close though. Too close for comfort, in fact. I would rather not have it be that tight because it just increases risk of damaging wire connections or shorting things out. So I think I am going to go ahead and, whether I do the battery in the back or in the front, either way I would want to move this recharge port. With that in mind, rather than having the battery in back and having it stick into the crystal area a little bit, I'm going to put the board in the back and then use that area that the battery would have been sticking out to put the recharge port, instead of having two areas that I have to use for function rather than aesthetics. As per usual, I will be building in some sort of mechanism to hide the recharge port when it's not in use. That's something I've started doing recently and really enjoy. It just adds a lot to the Saber, if you ask me. Just either a sliding or rotating or swinging, some sort of moving part that covers up that recharge port while it's not in use. So, I'm not going to get rid of that prism just yet, because he is going to be replacing this guy in a moment, like so. But for now, I'm going to come back over here. I'm going to do the battery real quick, just because that's going to be a very simple, very easy process. OD of a battery is a little bit less than 3/4 of an inch, so I generally throw in a 3/4 of an inch hole in order to allow a little bit of wiggle room for that battery. So our battery is going to sit right about there. I could also move him out to where the chassis doesn't wrap entirely around the thing. I think I'll go with this option. So I'm going to make those tangent. double check the length of the battery real quick. This is a model of the 18650s that can be easily acquired from TCSS. It is of course just a rough design. I don't have the wires coming off of it, but it's enough for me to figure out how much space I need to allow. So I want to measure from end to end. And I have 2.69, so if I allow 2.725, that's plenty of space. Hide that guy for a moment. You know what? I'm gonna move this. My original thought was it would look cooler if it were centered on the battery, but it's gonna support it better from down here. And support is more important than aesthetics. Can now get rid of all my excess lines that I just used as references. Alright, so our battery is going to fit right in there. I'm going to go ahead and create a new assembly file. First thing I want to put in is this rough chassis that I'm working on. And then I'll go ahead and throw in the battery since I just modeled that. Move it into position with my mating tools. And as you can see, there is a little bit of clearance between the holder and the battery, just so it's not too tight. This gives us plenty of space to run wires underneath the battery to get to our 3 LED modules or NeoPixel strips, whichever you may be using. Next thing I'll do is I'll go ahead and throw in the board holder. So I'm going to come to the top plane here. And I'm going to go ahead and convert a couple of these lines so that I can see what I'm dealing with in terms of location. And actually, I'm not going to use the convert tool, I'm going to use the offset tool. You know what? Convert, and then I'll just center it in order to maximize the offset to both sides. Like so. Alright, that's our max allowable space. I'm going to go ahead and put a center line in here. And then draw in our rectangle. which on a prism is 1.505 by 0.815, I think. Again, I'm going to verify that just with my model. Eight hundred thousandths across, and 1.5. It's 1.55, not 1.505. And 815 is a good size for the width. It gives us a little bit of clearance. Okay, we have the location of our board holder established. Let's go ahead and determine how much space we're going to cut it into the board. I'm thinking I might want to drop this thing just a little lower. So I'm going to do that real quick by changing my offset. Give us a little bit of extra space there. There we go. And I'm going to fill these guys. Now, my goal is to have this section right here be approximately 65 to 70 thousandths. That's my acceptable range. And that's just a little bit more than the thickness of the board. So right now we're at about 68 thousandths, so slightly higher than right smack dab in the middle of it. So I'm just going to leave that there. Now I gotta get rid of this excess in the front to make accessing the SD card easier. Unfortunately, I seem to be a little frozen at the moment. Alright, there we go, we're good to go again. So I'm just gonna convert these entities over into my sketch to complete the loop. Now I'll just cut that out, like so. And there is a basic geometry of our board holder. It's going to sit in there the way you're looking at it now, with the SD card coming off this way. Now I just need to I need to make the cutouts to allow for all of these components on the underside of the board. Rather than drawing it all up from scratch, I'm going to open up another file that I've used to make prism chassis, that I've made a prism chassis from before, and just use that geometry, copy it directly in to save some time. Alright, so once again, I'm just looking through my models directory. So I've got, this guy, I almost opened one, but I believe that this is actually oriented the other way, where the SD card is facing down. So let's go and check something else real quick. I know this looks boring, but it's going to save a bunch of time in the end. This guy might have what we're looking for. Or no, that is a hybrid chassis, which I may as well put that in. This will hold both a prism and a nano biscotti. Just have to cut here, here, and here. These three locations to allow for a prism holder. Get rid of this smaller geometry that holds in the nano. So I'm gonna go ahead and use that. Now the question is, how did I go about making this booger? It's been a while. So I'm going to use my rollback tool to figure out where I started working on that, and then I'm going to rebuild it from the ground up, essentially. Let's see. Fine. Gotta go a little further. A little further yet. What cut is this? That is going to be, wow, that's a long ways back. Okay. Okay, I have successfully gotten behind it. So this cut right here is, I'm going to assume, is just the rough board size. So let's take a look at this sketch and double check that. 1.55, 5.8. Yes, that is the rough board size. And being that I used 0.8 over there, I'm going to go ahead and make sure this is exactly the same. Now I also, by doing that, have changed this geometry ever so slightly. Let's go ahead and recheck our length here. If I can manage to get the right piece of geometry. There it is. Okay, it is now beyond my acceptable range. So I'm going to make this fillet a little bit bigger. I could also have done this by changing the depth of the cut. Thinking though that is going to get us within the tolerance that I've set. Yes, it does. Perfect. Let's go ahead and move forward one step in this file. And what did I build? Okay, it looks like I've filled in a gap that was somewhere, perhaps? Yes, that's all I did, was I filled in a gap. The next thing I did was to cut away a little bit of excess material. Alright, and here I am starting to put in the holder geometry. So I'm going to go ahead and flip this bad guy over so that we're looking at them from the same view. And I'm assuming that this guy is also going to be holder geometry. It is not. This one is, though. Ah, okay, now we're getting somewhere. So I'm going to go ahead and edit this sketch. come over here, say convert into t's. I'm going to place a point right at the corner here. And then I'm going to copy all this geometry. Come back to here and open up a new sketch on this face. Create this reference point in the same corner. That way I can just rotate this over and move it into the same location, relative location. Alright, so I did a rotate. It is a flip that I need to do. I need to flip it across. Let's use this guy right here. Like so. That is what I need. I accidentally flipped my reference point as well. So let's get rid of that extra one. And put that right there. Now I'm going to go ahead and trim off the excess of these other guys, because the last time I created these holders using extruded bosses, and this time I'm cutting away from existing bosses. There we go. Okay, so now if I create a cut, I will be left with the same geometry as I made by creating bosses here. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Extruded cut. Let's go 100 thousandths, which is slightly more than necessary, but again, better have more space than not enough. Somewhere I've got an extra line floating around, messing things up. Wait, I think I may have found it. Yep, there it was. Okay. Moving right along over in this other chassis model. Just rolling one step at a time until I find the processes. No, operations. That's the word I'm looking for. Alright, so that affected those guys. How did it affect them? Did it just lower them? Yes, it just lowered them. So I don't need to be concerned about that. Okay, that created a little lip in the back to help hold the board more securely. That's an easy task. And then the next operation, I believe, puts a little rounded corner on this edge. It's a little bigger than I'd like. that's better. Not quite. That looks good. I like that. Okay. Okay, now I'm creating another little board holder. Once again, I'm just going to create a reference point and copy the geometry. Excuse me, a little hiccup there. And once again, I need to flip this thing. I'm assuming it may actually be a nope, it is a rotate this time, I think. This is curious. Let's go ahead and just flip it. Flip those around that. It's not seeming to want to grab my point, which is annoying. There it is. It doesn't look quite right, so I'm going to look straight down on top of both of these when they're in the exact same orientation and see if I can tell what the discrepancy is. So this guy is definitely backwards, as I was afraid. It's an easy fix though. I'm just going to rotate it 180 degrees around that point. Alright, now we look the same. Now we're doing good. So if I go like this, create an extruded cut. That's going the wrong direction. Oops. There we go. And I'm actually going to take this fillet. I may want to get rid of this fillet somehow on this section. So I'm going to sketch here. I'm going to convert this line here. And then draw these dudes in. Creating a profile. Whoops. That apparently does not quite intersect. Why is that? that part's fine. Okay, so if I just drag this out, that was odd. Gonna extrude that right up to this face here. This way I have a little bit more to grab or to create geometry with when it comes time to create the extending part of the, sorry about that, totally just bumped my mic there. The extending part of the holder. This is going to be a little snap tab. And there it is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sketch, put in a center line here, and then use my offset tool to establish where the base of my extension is going to be. And I just got to complete the rectangle by following the lines around the outside of this geometry. And then extrude all of that out, about 35 thousandths. That's what I usually do. Hopping back over here, the next thing I do is I add the curves and angles to that guy. And I think I'm actually going to make this guy a little longer. Round these off a little bit, just make it a little prettier looking. Alright, now that should snap over the top of our board very nicely. And with the back of it stuck underneath of this, it's not going to go anywhere. So that, of course, that would be plenty if I only wanted to hold the prism. But I'm not stopping there. As I mentioned, I'm going to go ahead and recreate this entire geometry over here and make it to where it will also hold a prism or a nano biscotti. Sorry for that mix up. I'm a little tired today. Alright. Just going back to hopping through all of these operations, trying to find the right ones. Let's go forward up until there, because I'm pretty sure the next thing is going to be a boss that we need to pay attention to. Let's scroll through a couple of these bosses, see what we find. Alright, that's another snap tab, but it's for a different board. So let's once again roll forward to the next boss. There we go. Now that is what we need. Once again, I'm going to orient myself the same both ways. Create a reference point down in the corner and copy the geometry. I may have to cut this guy a little deeper. I think I am, in order to allow for a larger width on this for better strength. So before I get too carried away, I'm going to edit this feature here. And instead of 100 thousandths, I'm going to extend it out to... You know what? Let's just do this. Let's just do offset from surface. We'll use this surface here, and we will say our offset is going to be 50 thousandths. And I'm going to clear out the excess on these little holders. Just like so. Now I want to make sure that I am keeping enough geometry up here to not compromise the strength. So I'm going to make sure that these are 100 thousandths apart. And then I'm going to just cut all of this excess out. Like so. We're now dealing with something that is a little more similar to this. It's of course not exactly the same, but this one has so much cut out from it in order to allow for multiple boards that it really looks a lot more like that than what we were dealing with before, which is the torpus type of thing I normally do. Once again, reorient the geometry, match my reference, and then just shift it right on over. So that is at the bottom of the board. I want to go up about 65 thousandths, which is about what the depth we have is here. As you can see, or you know what, I'm just going to go up to surface so it's a nice clean match. Like that, which is approximately 65 thousandths, and then I'm going to go the other direction as well. Once again, just to make this a little stronger. So 65 and 35 makes 100, that's perfect. Now, as you can see on this one, if you remember, I did create a couple cutouts. I made it smaller right here and right here, so that it's easier to remove if you are indeed using a prism. But having the entire geometry that thin would result in a really floppy construct. The other thing I do is I'm going to add a small extrusion on this face in the corner, coming over to this face, once again just for a little bit of extra stability. So let's go ahead and roll forward a little bit and take a look at what else we've created. I have made a couple of cuts and the boss that helps to fix it a little better. Okay, once again, easy stuff. So I'm just going to sketch on that face. I'm going to do this one slightly differently. Make those collinear. And then make these two sets equal. We'll get a nice little square, which is about 50 thousandths. That's plenty to add a little structure without being so thick that it causes troubles or annoyance when trying to remove it. And it's just in a matter of taking a razor knife and cutting right through there, and then if need be, which you may or may not, depending on the sharpness of your knife, a little sandpaper to the side of the wall. And there we have our middle support. Pop a couple rectangles in here. Once again, just make them squares with the equal length relations. And then cut that out to where we're left with approximately the same size. It's going to be ever so slightly different because this is not exactly 65 thousandths from here to here, or I should say from here to here, but it's pretty close to that, close enough for what we're doing here. Checking a few more things over on the other chassis at this moment. I'm gonna roll forward a little bit. Alright, so what did I do? I added a couple prettying features. I added a little support there. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that. Copy that, and we're going to put it right over here. Match our reference point and drag the geometry. Now see, this looks a little odd. I think this one may be, it depends on which side I drew the geometry from, whether I drew it looking at it this way or looking at it that way, how I have to manipulate it once it's on this part. I think this one needs to be done the other way. So I'm going to go ahead and flip-flop this guy like so, and we'll give this a whirl. That looks better. So what is the length here? 0.145. I'm going to make those collinear. Just again, finding little things to improve on with each time I'm doing this. And we're going to extend this downwards about 50 thousandths. Let's go right up to the surface of the bottom here, which I am going to have a mighty hard time getting to. I might be able to use up to vertex. Yes, I can. Perfect. Alright, and the last thing that we see here that I need to worry about is, again, another little holder. And that's going to be Boss Extrude 40. So I'm going to check the sketch on that one. I'm assuming I drew it. That's how I did it. Okay. So once again, I'm just going to create the same geometry. Copy. Come back over here, create a new sketch. This is a lot of repetitive work, but it's gonna save me a whole bunch of time copying this one rather than trying to relearn it. I'm gonna make that a little larger this time. Now, I'm looking at this and I don't see anything else that needs to be put in place in order for this to be a functioning system. I'm going to go ahead and look through a few more of these operations here, but I'm pretty sure that's all just moving on to the next holders. None of this is relating anymore. So I think we're done, with the exception of prettying up this guy a little bit. So, thank you for your service, good sir, and you may go home now. Alright, so now that is serving the same function as this cutout does over here, or this extrusion that creates a little lip over the top of the board. And this lip is just on the side. The prism is long enough that it should be able to snap in nicely, even though this is not facing directly opposite. But the nano, having it directly opposite is going to be better. So that's why it's on this side and not over here. So I'm going to double check this thing now. I'm going to go ahead and pop over into my assembly file and grab the nano and the prism models and throw them in here to see what happens. So first I'm going to test the nano. Well, let's test the prism first. Why not? So I'm going to grab my rollback bar and essentially get rid of... Went a little too far. Get rid of that nano holder. Alright, that's what we like to see. Alright, prism here needs to flip around X. Perfect. Gonna make sure that it's sitting on the correct surface here. That looks great. Let's go ahead and change the transparency of this so I can look at it from the bottom and make sure we don't have any interferences. None whatsoever. Lovely. Lovely. Okay. I'm now going to hide this part, hide the prism, and roll all this forward. Do the same thing with the nano, just throw the model in, make sure everything's going to play nice together. Go back into my shared folder. find the Nano. Here he is. So now one thing I did find out about the Nano, these models were created by Irv Plechter, who is the guy, if you don't know, who produces these boards. One thing I did find out though is that the SD card holder is not quite big enough, so I had to add a little bit. This is the original model that he created. All I've done is extend that geometry upwards a little. I keep telling myself I will add these guys in as well, but it's not something I've gotten around to doing yet. But the point is, this represents the proper height for the SD card holder. So here's the Nano. It also needs to be flipped on the x-axis. And again, we're going to just mate it to the surface here. So far so good. Flip it over. No interference. It's perfect. And as you can see, even with the increased SD card holder height, we're not in danger of running into the inside of the hilt. It is set down far enough to avoid that potential issue. So I'm going to hide that again. Unhide this guy. And pop back over here into the chassis model. Select all of this goodness here. And hide it from us. Now I can put that back in at a moment's notice. Just like so. But the prism looks a little nicer in the assembly file. In order to, it's given me an error because I selected one of the faces in that geometry as the mating face for this guy. So to avoid that error, I'm just going to replace it with one of these guys, which is on the same level, but does not disappear on us. That way we won't have an error. Alright, I'm going to add the speaker in real quick, just because the speaker holder is already done. But other than that, because I used a lot of existing geometry, this was really easy. Went pretty quick. The basics of this thing are done. I just need to work on the crystal chamber and recharge port area. Speaker done. So one thing that I'll do here, I'm going to add, as part of the crystal chamber, I'm going to have a little lip that comes over onto this side of the SD card face cut out. So I'm going to go ahead and unhide this guy real quick just to see how the SD card compares. We've still got a decent amount of space here. I'm going to measure how much space just so we can be sure. Looks like I can get away with, about 3.5 millimeters, 4 millimeters. And I'll just have a little lip that sits on there. And then I will have a rod. We'll model in a rod that can come from here over in order to help secure it in place. Or you know what, that's another idea. I'm just having all sorts of ideas. And this one I think is what I'm going to do here. I'm going to put a little groove here and here so that the and then these the two end parts will have a corresponding little boss. So they will slot in, you know, you'll stick them in kind of at an angle and then push it downwards. Either that or put the first one you can put in and then just slide over. The second one will have to have a little curve on it so they can both be pushed down. And then, yes, that would make a effective hinge point in the middle. Then we'll just take a piece of threaded rod or some such, stick it through both of those parts and lock them together. It's going to be a little bit more friendly to assemblers, myself included. So, now is perhaps the most important time in modeling up a crystal chamber, and that is figuring out what I want it to look like. I still do want to cut out a little bit of this space so that I can create more. Or there's an idea. I definitely want to cut out some of this space so that I can have a little bit more metal geometry going in, because that's always cool. So I'm going to do that real quick. But the point is, I need to figure out what I want this chamber to look like. I have one idea that I had a couple days ago maybe, but the most of this thing, I'm not sure what I want it to look like. So I'm just going to do this for now. Once again, I'm going to use a width of 50 thousandths. Okay, so if we do that, I am losing part of this cutout here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take, there should be a boss up here somewhere, or no, it's one of the things that got removed. So I'm just going to create a new boss. And I'm going to extend this out all the way to where the crystal chamber is at. So that I know for sure I'm not going to be interfering with my screws. If I have to cut out a little bit of it, okay, but just so long as I don't cut to where there's a hole again, the screws will clear. to there. Perfect. How many wires? That's an excellent question. How many wires are going to go from the board to the front half of the chassis? Obviously, we need the battery, so that's 2. We need the LEDs, which could be done in, if you use like a 24 gauge common positive, could be 1 there, and then you'd need 2, 4, 5, 6, 6 or 7. I'm not sure. 6 or 7 for the Trident, depending on how you set it up. And so add those. It's 9. Add another one for an accent LED on the top. So we need to get at least 10 wires up through to the front. And that's with using a large gauge wire. I don't think we can fit all of that through this much space. However, if I were to make a cutout that was this size, if I were to make a cutout that was the outer size of this, and then just have the... That actually might look pretty nifty. Yeah. Alright, that's what's gonna happen. I'm gonna create a wiring channel down here. And I'm going to use this sketch to help me do so. This is where we're going to run our wires, and that should be plenty of space. That's going to create our wiring channel. So now when I build the actual chamber inserts, they're just going to have 2 little humps in them, so they fit down inside there nicely. One will of course allow the screws to pass, the other the wires. I'm going to stick that out there a little further. There's no need to cram food where it's not necessary. Perfect. Okay. It's all cosmetic now. It really is. Well, I continue to mull over what I'm going to do for my chamber design. I'll just go ahead and throw in the cuts that I had on the other model because I like the way those came out in the board holder and whatnot. So I'm gonna go to my front plane here. Convert some of these entities for reference. I'm going to pull one of them down all the way to the bottom and the other one all the way to the top of this area. Or you know what, that doesn't even matter. It just needs to be centered this way. Okay, perfect. That actually, if I go off of this midpoint, that actually might create a really nice location for the top of my slot. So I'm going to change the way I'm going to do it, just a little. To put in a new line there apparently in order to be able to mirror those guys. There we go. Now I'm gonna pull up the other one real quick. And see. Definitely had more there. I also had a longer board. I'm gonna check the width on them real quick. No, that's definitely the same width. I'm going to modify it. Might not be exactly the same, but I'm going to modify it just a little bit. So I'm going to take this base guy, pull him down to 90 thousandth or so. And change my spacing as well. There we go. Now I should be able to take this and bump him up to 5 units. And yes, we just barely squeeze it in there. Perfect. Being that I've modified that, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this chamfer here and extend this cut a little further. just so that we don't have this really weird looking thin guy. Perfect. I can dig it. Now I'm going to go ahead and throw in these bars here so that we don't have too much of a floppy situation. Although, to be honest with this one, the walls are thick enough here that I'm really not worried about it. I do like the looks, though. I do like the looks. So I'm just going to pop this guy up to the top. Go ahead and throw that down. Pull this one back out, since it's what we're working on. See if I can't just, again, use this same sketch. Drop a point in the middle there. Copy it all. I'm gonna have to cut a little bit of it out, but that's no trouble. And there we have our rear detailing complete. And it looks very nice. I like it. I like the way that I generally like to do that sort of a thing underneath my soundboards. Maybe I'm closed-minded, but I really like the way that it looks. It adds a nice little detail, if you ask me. Okay, one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to modify these cuts a little bit. So, let's do this. Edit feature. Extend him out like so. I want them to get to where they're okay, I need to modify this before I have those cuts. So I'm going to roll this back. Ah, that's what's different about this. Okay. It's narrow enough that I'm not actually coming through on those guys into the board area. So I'm going to edit this sketch a little bit. I should be able to fix the issue just by making those holes a tad bit bigger. Perfect. And add a little chamfer to him. Rebuild my cuts, and I like that better, but I'm gonna go ahead and make these a little shallower. Let's see what this gets us. It's pretty decent looking. A little bit of clearance area for the wire manipulate over into that cut, which is a little oversized now, but it shouldn't be too much of an issue. Now I will mention that, of course, the best speaker is one that is sealed off entirely. So if you want this to sound really great, you're going to want to fill this with maybe electrical tape, or liquid tape, or some hot glue or something like that, just so that you create a closed off area. Same thing with these slots out here. If you didn't catch last week's video, this 28mm speaker, as you can see, sticks out just a hair from the edge of the chassis. So it is going to require a little bit of Dremel work on the part of the end user to get that speaker to actually fit, just by notching out the body of the hilt. I think it's going to be worth it though, in order to have a bass speaker in here rather than just a plain old 28mm flat speaker, or going with a smaller speaker like a 24 or a 26mm, which I have seen. Not very much, but I have seen one. This will give a lot richer sound. I will be designing some replacement pommel inserts, as well as the ones up top that are going to be both more accurate, and for the ones in the pommel, they will be vented for sound. It's going to be as one piece that's hollow, with various little holes and such hidden, holes and slots hidden within the details. This guy, I'm going to change his location a little bit. Instead of having it on there, I'd like to have it there. And then I'm going to do the same thing I did on the other side, just extend it out a little ways. And add a chamfer. There's no point in having that cut go all the way to the front, as our wires can just pop out and hang out underneath the battery. Like so. Perfect. I like that. That's going to work nicely, I think. Now this will require me to design a second version of the, or maybe not perhaps a second version. What I'll do is I'll have, yes, that's what I'm going to do. For the greebly that goes in the hole the recharge port is going in on the other chassis, I will just make a metal cap for that. And then I will make sure that included with this version of the chassis, you know, you won't have to go and buy a separate part. It's just gonna you'll just have to go and go check the, I'm sorry. It will be under one model name. You only have to buy one model, and it will print, and you'll receive both parts. Now the second part is going to be a little adapter. For this one, it's just going to be a little plug with a inverted round on the bottom face of it, so that you can easily affix it to your chassis. On the other one, it's going to be a twist kill key that you can attach to that cap, in order to, so that you can use the greebly as your kill key instead of having another one. You know, just pull it out to recharge, twist it on or off. So I'm gonna make a call here. I'm gonna go ahead and end the stream for now. I am not thinking very straight. I'm not thinking particularly clearly. I'm having a hard time being inspired with this crystal chamber design. I don't really know what I want to do with that. There's not really anybody at the moment. There is nobody watching, so I'm gonna call it here. I know I usually go for longer, and come back when I'm feeling a little more rested and a little more creative. Thank you to you guys who did come and watch for a little bit. I do appreciate you stopping by. This is not about that at all. I am just not being very productive right now, and I feel like my time could be better used somewhere else, as I do have a lot of other stuff on my plate that wouldn't require quite as much brain power. So again, thank you guys very much for watching. I appreciate you coming by. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, evening, whatever it may be where you are. And I will catch you next time.